Hello everyone, it's Andrew from Gem TCG, and today I want to talk about the perfect way to onboard a new TCG into your inventory. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're primarily selling Pokemon, but you see a market growing in a different TCG, let's say One Piece, how to safely make that transition without just blowing a bunch of money and taking a huge risk for no reason, and then be able to scale it so that way you can build it into a significant stream of income. And I'm going to be speaking from mainly personal experience and also kind of what I talked about with Nick from Dynamax Deals in the video that came out yesterday. And for me, for the past however long I've been doing this, I've mainly been selling Pokemon. That's 99% of my sales. And the first other TCG that I started selling was Dragon Ball Super. And at the time, it did very well. I even still sell it to this day. And it did really well. I enjoyed selling it because I just like Dragon Ball. I've grown up watching it. So it was a cool thing to be able to collect them and sell them too. And I think I did it in a way that made very well financial sense. And then also just, it did well. It became a good source of income with a much lower risk and less volatility than something like Pokemon. And I know there's a lot of new TCGs like Gundam, Riftbound. There's a bunch of new ones coming out that are actually gaining in popularity. So I think this video is just going to be very helpful for those of you that are considering it or maybe have already started doing it. So the number one thing I want to say is that when you are thinking about getting a new TCG, first you need to look at Facebook groups and TCGplayer sales data. And the reason why these two things are very important is because you want to see, is there an actual community being built around this TCG, or is it just something that you hear about online and maybe a few people are pumping it, but it's not actually a substantial community or player base. And that is why I say look at Facebook groups, because if you look at, let's just say Gundam TCG, and you look for that Facebook group on Facebook, and you see there's a group with 30,000 people in it, or 20,000, some big number, and it's active, people are messaging in those groups, they're making posts, buying and selling stuff. If you see that, that is a very good sign that it's a good TCG to invest in and start selling. And then the next thing you want to look at, which kind of goes hand in hand, is that you want to look on TCGplayer, sort it by best selling or best match, and see how common these sales are. And you want to look at both the expensive cards and also the lower end cards. Like, for example, in the 50 cents to $5 range. You want to see a high sales volume on those cards, because if there's no real sales data and you see one sale every week or one sale a month, that could show you that there's not that much volume in this TCG. Maybe it's not good to look into. Or you might see some patterns you might think are important. Let's say cards above $100 are selling, but cards below 10 never sell. And I think that's very common with Weiss Schwartz, because I know when I first heard Rudy from Alpha Investments talk about Weiss, I kind of looked into it a little bit, and I bought some bulk from somebody, and I started listing some of these cards, and they just never sold. And it was from good IPs. There was the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Attack on Titan, and I've maybe sold 10 cards out of the 5,000 that I listed. So it was a huge waste of time. Bulk clearly did not sell for that type of TCG, and maybe that's just bad experience on my end, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. But I know that when I found a card in the bulk that was worth $8, it sold instantly, and stuff like that. You just have to be aware of that, which mainly you'll learn from experience. But if you can get that information before making that investment, then I think it could be very helpful and save you a lot of time and money. Next thing, now that you've done the research and you see that there's a good community and sales volume is there, next up you have to actually find inventory for it. And the best way that I think to make that first purchase in a new TCG is with bulk. I would not recommend going in and buying a collection of a new TCG when you haven't even sold anything else from it, because you don't know how certain things sell. You could be buying a card from a brand new set that you're not aware of, but the seller knows, and they're just trying to quickly flip it. and then you get burned. That is a very common thing that can happen, and you need to understand how these TCGs operate. Like Magic, I remember I bought a collection when I first started transitioning to it, and it turned out very bad. I think I've sold maybe 2 cards from that collection, and maybe it's because it just was like cards that had no demand, or because I didn't have a customer base for it on eBay yet. So when I listed them, it was hard to get shown to the right people. But then I started buying bulk from Magic, just regular common, uncommon, foils. I got some rares and mythics, and every so often I get a few sales a day on just bulk cards that I paid 2 cents for and I'm selling for $3. And these things they're the best way to just get those sales coming in with a very low upfront cost. Because if you think about it, I bought probably, let's just say for easy numbers, but it's probably around this range, 10,000 common, uncommon foils from somebody, and that cost me $200. That is a very, and I know in my situation, $200 is a much smaller investment, but I know for a lot of you guys starting off, 200 might be more, so just scale it down. You don't need to buy 10,000 commons and uncommons to start off, but you get the point. And that $200, sure, it's not going to be made back instantly, but I could see how people operate when they buy these cards. What cards are they looking out for? Does it even sell? Did I just spend all that money and make 0 sales? You can learn a lot of things with a very small upfront cost. Whereas if you go in and someone offers you a collection for like $500 and then you offer them 70%, there's a chance that you might get burned on that collection and none of them will sell. Or you're listing them in the wrong places, or so many things could be wrong that you're just unaware of. And that is why buying bulk to sell when you're starting off with the new TCG is very important, because you can learn all these new things and just become better at selling it. And I think this is most important for Pokemon sellers to learn, because for me, selling Pokemon, it's so easy. Obviously, there's higher demand when it comes to buying collections, and you have to offer higher rates. But you list a card on eBay, it'll sell. Like it doesn't even matter what price it is. If you do that and you have a big enough store, it'll just sell no problem. But when you're selling Magic cards, or you're selling One Piece or any other TCG that's not as big, I'm not saying that Magic is not big, but the customer base is different and the way that they buy cards is different. It's harder to sell these things, and you need to have a better outlet to sell them. Because for Magic, for example, you need however many lands in a deck, or only the competitive cards will sell. Everything else is basically just junk. These are things that you need to learn, and you can learn that through bulk, but it's very hard if you're starting off with one collection and then you trying to do it that way. And then as for what marketplace you want to have these listed on, that's a different conversation, and I think it really depends. I would probably recommend, because TCGplayer is better for volume, I would recommend starting it off on TCGplayer, just seeing how it goes, and then moving on to eBay. And I know now with TCG Automate, it's very easy to list them to eBay, probably quicker than TCGplayer at this point, but I would still recommend listing them on TCGplayer, because it's easier volume, because you're selling at such a lower price. It sells quicker. And then once you notice sales starting to grow, you can list it to eBay. Or even if you have the time and you want to do this, I think this is the best approach, would be to list half, or kind of split it up evenly, both on eBay and TCGplayer, so that way you could see what is actually selling best and which marketplace does better for these cards. And that leads to another thing. It's like TCGplayer is primarily USA. Most customers are from USA, and that impacts what your customer base is going to be. But eBay, you could sell it to anywhere in the world, I think, if you have the international shipping available. So that opens up your market to a lot more people. And if you get a TCG that's very popular in, let's just say, Europe, and you list that to eBay, it'll sell. Especially if they can't get it in Europe and they only can get it from USA sellers. So there's a lot of nuanced things like that you have to be aware of in order to do well with this new TCG. And then I guess the next thing, once you get those outlets going and you notice some sales, you enjoy the new TCG. And that's another thing, you have to enjoy dealing with that new TCG. I know for me, Magic is kind of cool. Mainly for the vintage cards, I like the art on those. But with new cards, it's a little bit less fun, I guess, because I don't know, I just like the vintage arts for Magic. But Dragon Ball Super, I enjoyed selling it, which meant that when I'm working on it and making those listings is more fun for me. And I don't know if that has a correlation to how successful I was with the Dragon Ball Super cards. I don't know if it's correlated, but it worked. So focus on a TCG that you enjoy, I think. And then once that goes well, everything is going good, then you could start buying collections and scaling more with that TCG and still do the bulk, of course. And then while you're doing that, you want to make sure you're not dismissing your other TCG that has brought you to this point. If I were to start selling Riftbound cards, I'm not going to stop selling Pokemon. I don't think that's a good approach because, for one, you don't know that Riftbound or these other TCGs are going to be around for more than a year. And let's say the market cools down, you don't know if they're going to stay around during a bear market. Because if we look at MetaZoo, Dragon Ball Super, the Masters version, Digimon, like all these big TCGs, they kind of die off sometimes. And maybe not Digimon, that might be a bad example. But not all TCGs will be around forever. Pokemon and Magic are the number one. They have stood around for over 30 years now, or almost 30 years for Pokemon. And there's a reason why it's like that. But these other TCGs, they still have to prove themselves. They've only been around for a year or two, or maybe a little bit longer, but still, you don't have as much history with those TCGs to then go in and say, oh, I can invest thousands of dollars in this new TCG. And that's why, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I see all these people on TikTok and they're like, oh, I sold my Pokemon inventory. I cleared out all of my Pokemon inventory to invest in One Piece. And I think that is the worst thing you could do. And when they say they're clearing it out for One Piece, they're buying sealed One Piece. And that is a huge risk. Sure, it could pay off. And 5 years from now, One Piece could be, their return for the One Piece investment could outweigh the return that they would have got from Pokemon. That is possible. But the safest option is to stick with the TCGs that have been around longer. Because the longer it's been around, the harder it is to fail. And I would definitely not advise that you start investing and holding on to these items if you're starting a new TCG. Just try to flip them and work with it, and then as it grows and you see that there is long-term potential with it, then you could start focusing on the investment side. But otherwise, I would not recommend investing. The only thing I really would recommend investing in is Pokemon, because it does do so well in the long run. Even Magic, not every set goes up in the same way that Pokemon does. So, but back to the main thing. Don't forget about what brought you to this point and try to still at least maintain the previous TCG while you're growing the new one. And that's pretty much it for this video. Comment down below what TCGs you guys are interested in branching off on, because I'm thinking about starting a new one or growing into a new one. I have the Pokemon, Dragon Ball, and then Magic. I want to see if I can maybe do One Piece or something, but let me know what you guys think and what you guys are doing. And hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll see you all in the next video.